widely on June the 1st, the details of which year groups would be involved came as a complete surprise, and not a good surprise. It hadn't been discussed with union leaders or school head teachers, who would have told Boris Johnson that 3 of the year groups that he'd chosen to bring back, reception, year 1 and nursery, were those that were least likely to be able to understand or keep to things like social distancing. Older pupils perhaps, but younger pupils whose educational experience is based on things like working together, sharing equipment and resources, moving around, hugging each other, hugging their teacher, holding hands. As one colleague said, how can we hope to contain the spread of virus in schools? We can't even contain the spread of nits. So school teachers went into overdrive trying to plan for the safe return of pupils, but we all knew that it just wasn't safe yet to try. And I'm sure most of us listened to Boris Johnson's embarrassing attempt to explain how the government had passed its 5 tests and how unconvincing that all sounded. The union has got its own 5 tests, and we said until these 5 tests have been met, it's not safe for schools to open more widely. We wanted there to be a lower number of COVID-19 cases. We want there to be a national plan for social distancing and the provision of PPE. We want testing for staff and pupils to be in place and a proper programme of contact tracing. We want a whole school strategy, so if a case occurs, what is a school going to do? And we want protection for our vulnerable members and the family members that they have who may also be vulnerable.
Exactly.
Our members are desperate to get back to work. We miss the children that we teach, and we're worried about the effect all this is having on them. Are they getting enough to eat? Are they feeling isolated? Are they worried about falling behind with their work? Have they experienced family members dying? It isn't safe yet. We want to go back to work, but it isn't safe yet. And we don't want to risk our health, the children's health, their families, or their communities. So initially, we refused to engage with planning for a return on June the 1st, although we were happy to plan for a wider reopening when it is safe. We aren't quite sure how many schools reopened this week. When we spoke to the Director of Education for Birmingham in the middle of last week, he thought it was going to be about 30% of primaries in Birmingham that would reopen. But then the next day, the independent SAGE group published their report, and a number of other schools then pushed back for a later opening to the date of the 15th. So we're not quite sure exactly how many schools did open this week, but somewhere around a little below 30%, it seems likely. One thing I do need to do is to thank Boris Johnson for his excellent work in regard to recruitment for the NEU. Since the lockdown began and schools closed for all except vulnerable children and children of key workers, nationally the union has seen thousands of new members, hundreds of them here in Birmingham. Crucially, it's also resulted in a large number of new school reps and new health and safety reps. When I last counted, we had about 40 new school reps and another 20 or so health and safety reps. And existing reps and members have also been re-energized. We had 2 meetings recently, each with over 200 attendees on Zoom. The reps put their names to letters to Ian Ward, leader of the council, local MPs and CEOs of local multi-academy trusts. They joined WhatsApp groups and they encourage and inspire each other, and they celebrate each other's successes and encourage them on to do more. I can't help wishing sometimes they wouldn't do quite so much inspiring, encouraging and celebrating late in the evening, because the continuous pinging of the WhatsApp notifications is spoiling my beauty sleep. But joking apart, the determination of these reps who have challenged and persuaded and advised their head teacher over whether their schools are meeting safety standards will have actually led to lives being saved. We've had strong support from local MPs who've replied to the reps' letters, and some spoke at our meeting in the week before half term. We've also had excellent support from some councillors, particularly Kath Scott and Lisa Trickett, Ollie Armstrong and Nikki Brennan. The council leadership, however, has been sadly lacking. Instead of taking decisive action and keeping schools closed until it was safer, as happened in places like Liverpool and Hartlepool, it's dithered around and left the decision to school leaders. And although they are specialists in education, they know nothing about virology and public health matters. And this has led to a situation where we can have a school at one end of the street that's open and a school at the other end of the street which is still closed. This is a ridiculous situation, and shame on the Labour Council, which is acting as a puppet for the Westminster government. As I said, some schools did open more widely this week before they'd actually received the PPE that the council had promised. Some schools still haven't received that PPE, but those that did found it's for emergency use only if a child develops symptoms. It's not preventative. There are serious concerns remaining about the safety of BAME pupils, staff, and their respective families and local communities as the reality of going back to the workplace hits. I was speaking to one multi-academy trust yesterday where over 50% of their staff across their 7 schools are BAME. They at least have taken the position that they don't expect these staff to be back at the workplace for the time being. Birmingham City Council is only now getting around to issuing that sort of advice. Birmingham NEU teachers and support staff have lost faith in the government on the issue of the wider opening of schools. Our members need decisive action and leadership from the council to stop more schools from opening while it's still unsafe. It's not too late to do this. All organisations should be agile enough to respond in changing, challenging circumstances. Whatever measures are being put in place at a school level, our members still don't feel safe going back to work, and many will be doing so reluctantly because they feel no choice. No, they have no choice. They deserve better. Happy to answer any questions. Hope that's been helpful.
Okay. Thank you, Shirley. It was a very informative little talk. Now, we have a session of a Q&A. And the first one is Tarsam. Tarsam, would you like to raise your question? No.
Sorry, I was just clapping.
Oh, clapping.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Anyone
like to raise a question?
Can I ask a question in that case?
Okay. Nine?
Yeah, I mean, where are the schools in terms of meeting all the safe health and safety conditions as and getting ready for the children? When do you think they will be ready?
It's really difficult to say. The union produced some checklists for each type of setting, whether it's primary, secondary or special. We sent those out to our members. Our reps have been busily filling these in, talking to their head teachers, getting the information. I think I have seen of these checklists, because they come through, copies come through to our office electronically. I think I have seen 4 schools where every category has been ticked as being the requirements being met. So about 4, I think it was, at this stage. So the answer must be that they are a long way from that. There is a massive range in the way that schools are reacting. Some schools are being incredibly inventive and incredibly careful about the arrangements they're setting up. But there are so many different things that they've got to account for. I mentioned about children not being able to socially distance. So for as long as that doesn't happen, then they haven't been able to meet our requirements. For as long as there isn't PPE available, it can't meet the requirements. It is very, very difficult to make the environment safe. They're not meeting the requirements.
Okay, thank you. Can we have a D. Hamblin next, please?
Hello, David Hamblin, GMB X13 branch, General Branch. Thanks very much for that. I just wanted to ask, what's the best avenue for coordinated statements and actions between the NEU and those unions representing support staff? And what's the most constructive way we can help, basically?
Right. Really happy and pleased to work with any sister unions, absolutely. I'll put our office email address onto the chat in a moment, and please do get in touch with our General Secretary, David Room, so that we can discuss how to take this forward. As I said at the start, I'm enormously proud of being in the NEU. I think as a union, I can't believe how well they've reacted. But we absolutely need to work with other unions who are involved in education. So please do get in touch with us. Messages of support from individuals or unions are incredibly well received by our reps. We've got a lot of new reps, as I've mentioned, and they are nervous of being rep. They are particularly frightened of what their head teacher will think of them when they stand up and say, no, I don't think this school is safe yet. Any encouragement that can be sent to them, if you could send it to the same email address, but I can put it onto the reps WhatsApp group. It's a group, it's got about 140 reps on at the moment. It's a massive thing, but it's quick and it gets it out to them very quickly, and they would much appreciate those messages of support. I'll put the email address on the chat in a moment. Thank you.
Okay. Next, Stuart Richardson.
Yeah, thanks for that very interesting and impressive talk, Shirley. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late, but at this massive demonstration today. I was going to ask about the council's response and MP's response locally. As you said, the council has been incredibly evasive, unlike Liverpool Council, Brighton Council, Hartlepool, very clear saying there shouldn't be an early opening. And you mentioned about the MPs. I did see Jack Dromey talk about not opening on the 1st of June, whereas a letter from Pritt Gill to the NEU was extremely evasive, and I haven't seen any other comment from the other MPs. And of course, where the same contrast is Rebecca Long-Bailey has actually clearly supported the NEU's test, whereas the new leader of the Labour Party said nothing at all. You know, so can you say something about what the MPs have said? It'd be very interesting to hear about that, and also a little bit more on what some of the councillors have said.
Okay, well, for the MPs, we had Tahir Ali and Jack Dromey spoke. I think you were at the meetings. Yeah, spoke at one of our meetings. Pritt Gill, yes, as you mentioned, sent. Well, I felt that it was a supportive letter. Perhaps not as much depth as some of the others. We had also good response from Jess Phillips, We even got a Tory MP replied to the reps' letters. Andrew Mitchell, it was surprisingly supportive. Put it onto the WhatsApp group, and everything went silent for a few months because nobody could quite believe it. Of course, it hasn't sort of materialised into any, outcome that would help matters. Of the local councillors, we've spent a lot of time encouraging our members to write to their own councillor, and I don't know all of the councillors concerned. I've mentioned a few that have been supportive, and Kath Scott has spoken at our meetings and is pushing and pushing, and a number of the councillors are saying we need to close the schools. The difficulty seems to be at a leadership level. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of it. I believe David Room, our General Secretary, has written to the leader of the council at either 3 or 4 times, urging him to reconsider and show some decisive leadership here. There obviously is tension between some of the councillors and the leader of the council. That's the difficulty there.
Okay. Next question, Kathy Gaff, please.
Yes, I'd just like to say that I saw a piece of correspondence from an NEU safety rep, I think, and he wasn't sure about everything and was suggesting that safety committees in different schools could meet jointly. And I think it would be a good idea to have reps from different unions, GMB and everything, actually having meetings to swap experience in terms of what is happening on safety on a regular basis. Could that be organised? And I'd like to suggest that the Birmingham Trades Council sends a message of support along those lines and perhaps mentions something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Noted. Yeah. Noted.
That's, as I mentioned, would certainly be welcome. Just to say for GMB and Unison, the checklists that are referred to, that our reps are going round and going through and telling their head teacher where things are not working well, those checklists are joined with GMB and Unison. They are badged by all three unions and Unite as well. So yes, where there are groups of reps in schools, we are advising them to work together, but certainly in regard to our checklists, those 3 support staff unions, absolutely. We are encouraging them to work together. Even the other teaching union, NASUWT, they have their own version of the checklist. And I don't think there's anything in their checklist that we wouldn't support. And I don't think there's anything in our checklist that they wouldn't support. It just happens to be to be 2 different checklists. So yes, and I know that our reps have found it really helpful to work with the reps from the other unions where they exist in our schools.
Okay, thank you. Now, can you all unmute yourselves, please? Unmute yourselves, please, and let's give a big round of applause to Shirley, please, for her excellent contribution.
Thank you.
Anyway, Shirley, you're quite entitled to remain and listen to the rest of the meeting.
I am going to listen to part of it, but I think I might need to join another meeting as well. But I'm about to put the email address on the chat.
If you can, please, yes, and we can note it as well. Okay. Our next speaker for tonight is Michael Roberts. We'll be talking about the economic situation after COVID-19. Okay, Michael.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me again to speak to Birmingham Trades Union Council. And in what I'm going to talk about is what's happening in the UK economy as a result of the pandemic and what is likely to happen as far as workers are concerned if and when most of us get back to work, if they still have a job when they get there. And to do that, I just want to share a few graphs with you if I can, because as is my want. So if you hold on and see if I can get this right, because particularly want to take up some of the points that Shirley mentioned in terms of whether the virus pandemic is sufficiently under control for anybody to be going back to work at the moment. So if I can just find the right one. Right, so what I noticed from Shirley's remarks was that there is still some uncertainty and caution about whether the pandemic is under control. The government, of course, is claiming that they're in a position to say that it is. But if you look at these graphs, which I just did this afternoon, at the level of deaths in the major European countries at the moment, who is leading the number of coronavirus deaths in Europe is the UK with just under 40,000, and some 6,000 or 7,000 now higher than Italy and France, and Spain over 12,000 higher, and compared to Germany, massively 30,000 higher. There's, apart from the United States and now Brazil, Britain has the highest number of deaths from the COVID virus in the world. And if you look more accurately and scientifically at deaths per million, because everybody's population is different, you can see that in Europe, apart from Belgium, which is not on that list, but amongst the major economies, UK now has more deaths per million than Spain or Italy, where the virus first broke out, and is well past those and is traveling fast away. And as you can see in the case of Germany, it's well down from there. If you look at the left-hand graph here, you can see the excess deaths over normal. We're getting the figures from the National Health Service and the Office of National Statistics and other countries. The number of deaths more than the average normal death rate at this time of the year or during the period of the pandemic. And you can see that the UK has had 60,000 more deaths than normal this year in 2020, due to, obviously mainly due to the pandemic. And that's way higher than comparable European countries in their 40,000s, in the case of Germany, only 6,000 more. And if you look at the right-hand graph there, you can see just the last 7 days, the number of deaths per million in the UK is averaging 4 per million on a daily basis on average over the last 7 days. That's nearly 3 times larger than Italy and Spain, who are lowering their lockdown, and even more is the gap between the UK and France and Germany. And yet our government is prepared to relax the restrictions and expect everybody to get back to work, take public transport, and of course they've just announced that everybody has to wear a mask now from next week or the week after next if they're going to work. But the indication here is, when you look at that rolling 7-day average, that there is no way that the UK has got this pandemic under control, at least compared to other countries. And yet, it's people going to work, the people who've had to be on the front line here, who have faced the biggest risk from this coronavirus. Here's some figures from Resolution Foundation, a trade union, a research organisation with independent economic forecasters, and they show a huge amount of key workers who face risk on the way of going to work, and all, compared to those people, if you look at the left-hand scale, that's lower pay, where it says 1 on the bottom left-hand corner. You can see there 25% of workers are either shut down or having to go work as key workers. Very few of them are working at home. If you look at the other end of the scale, the employees at the highest levels of income, the majority of them, if they're not, are still managing to work or working from home. So they're in a much safer position compared to many low-paid and key workers. And yet, across the board, we've seen during this pandemic of just only a few months, most households have lost their income seriously and been unable to maintain a particular income. they're using up their savings for living costs. They're struggling to pay bills in the case of 1 in 5, and there's often a delay in the payments that they're expected to cover these bills. The low paid in particular hit worst. 1/3 of the lowest paid fifth of employees are either on furlough, have lost their jobs permanently, or have seen a serious reduction in hours. And a large number of these people are forced now to claim universal credit in order to top up their income as best they can. We've now reached a figure of nearly over 2.5 million people on universal credit claimants during this pandemic. So we are seeing a major reduction in people's income, their ability to maintain conditions for their families, being forced to go to universal credit, and in many cases with key workers, they are being forced to go to work in order to help us, the rest of us, get through this pandemic and facing the risk of a virus which is still multiplying across the UK economy. Only half of workers are working, according to the Resolution Foundation. The other half are either furloughed or their employers are closed down temporarily or permanently, and business turnover has been dramatically reduced, so the prospects for companies being able to employ people at the same rates and in the same conditions are severely reduced as this pandemic continues. The economic shock is hitting the young and those on the lowest incomes the hardest. Sectors affected, we can see that necessary public health restrictions means that if you're on a typical weekly pay of 320, you're facing much worse possibilities of getting the virus than those people on the average as a whole. And 4 in 5 people in social housing are either working in sectors directly affected by social distancing or have jobs that can't be performed from home and are also caring for school-aged children, as Shirley has mentioned. And less than 1 in 10 low earners feel that they can work from home if needed, compared to half of those on the higher earnings. Obviously, if you can work from home, you're in a much more protected position. Young people tend to be in this lower paid group. They've got less savings, and they work disproportionately in the sectors that are losing the jobs the fastest, mainly in leisure, travel, and other services which have been completely closed down in the lockdown. So the pandemic is supposedly the attempt of the government to save lives, but of course we've seen, as from the figures I've shown, they're not doing a very good job at that, and they're certainly not saving livelihoods particularly of the 4.2 million low-paid workers. Half of frontline care workers are earning less than the rural living wage, while estimates of those paying pay below the legal minimum wage are anything between 20,000 and 160,000. And those delivery drivers who are coming to our door at the moment to provide us with necessary support are often forced into self-employment. They don't have sick pay and they're not on the minimum wage. And in 21st century Britain, an employer can cancel a shift for a 0 hours contract worker who has already been paid for a train fare to get to the job. That's the situation that can happen to many. And over the last 10 and 15 years, many workers have been moved off weekly pay onto monthly pay, 3/4 an hour monthly pay, which means that if there's a gap when the employers are paying you, the gap is huge now in this pandemic, forcing many people into a serious situation of not being able to survive. So I think the first thing we'd have to say as trade unionists is that we're looking to defend the jobs and conditions and improve upon them for workers if and when they go back to work over the next couple of months. The national living wage is at the lowest level in 4 decades. So it seems to me one of the basic things we should be fighting for is a significant rise in the national living wage to 2/3 of typical hourly pay. Workers should have the right to a contract that reflects the actual hours they work, the right to 2 weeks advance notice work schedules, and the right to compensation where shifts are cancelled without reasonable notice. Workers in large firms should have the right to choose how regularly they're paid, and workers involved in smaller companies should similarly at least be consulted on these issues. And sick pay needs to be extended to the low earners, and workers should qualify for unfair dismissal after 1 year instead of the 2-year arbitration requirement at the moment. Fines for underpayment of minimum wage have got to be enforced, and they're not being. And I think it's one of the areas where local authorities completely play a role in making spot checks, assuming they had the funds to do that. And unions, of course, in my view, should be given the right to enter the workplaces to raise awareness among workers. Now, the British industry is in a serious difficulty out of this pandemic lockdown. According to Make UK, which is the employers' association for particularly manufacturing industry, they've been driven to the cliff edge by this crisis, and many companies may not survive without direct government intervention. UK manufacturers are planning tens of thousands of redundancies. So even if workers go back in the next month or so, either they won't find their job is there, or if they do go back and the job is there, they're going to get less hours, they're going to get less opportunity to maintain their original conditions and hours, and so on. And then they may get redundant after a while as these companies go to the wall. According to Make UK, 25% of companies are drawing up plans to cut jobs over the next 6 months. A further 45% are considering redundancies, and only 30% said they expect to emerge from this pandemic with all their staff on the payroll. A decline in job vacancies is particularly sharp in the hospitality, leisure and travel areas, where vacancies are down by some 64% for the opportunity for people to get other jobs if they lose theirs. Now, the banks are saying that they've been lending money under the government schemes equivalent to 19 billion, so-called bounce back, could happen. These loans they're handing out to people, to companies, in order to keep things going through furloughing or through work before work starts again, so there isn't a collapse of hundreds of thousands of jobs. The banks are estimating that something like half of these 600,000 plus borrowers who've taken out this loan scheme could eventually default. They won't be able to pay this debt. So either the government will have to deliver just write this debt off, something like £100 billion might be involved, or the proposal that the government's thinking about is actually taking shares in businesses which default on their debt. So in other words, part nationalising or taking equity shares in this. On a very limited scale, those of us who can remember the global financial crash and the takeover of a few banks, which the government did, part nationalising some banks, but leaving the old owners completely in control of running those banks over the next 10 years and eventually beginning to set them off. This is the government is planning something similar in order to keep some of these bigger companies going. It seems to me that this is not enough. We need to be considering much more significant and radical measures on behalf of the trade union and labour movement demands that we should be presenting through our organisations to ensure better recovery for the UK economy and for the working world. This week, Prince Charles had a Zoominar with the IMF General Secretary. It was called Resetting the Economy. I agreed with the Prince Charles with the idea of that's what we should be looking for. This is an opportunity for us to put forward a program which really changed the nature of the British economy and other economies as well for the benefit of everybody, so that it aims at social need and not just returning to normal, making profits for big business in many areas where we no longer need. And the first and fundamental thing that we should be demanding, it seems to me, is a sharp increase in the financing and resourcing of our public health systems, not only in this country, but across the world. Because one lesson we've learned from this pandemic is that our health systems, on the whole, were unable to cope with this pandemic without introducing the lockdowns and the serious containment measures which have damaged the economy. They would have been overwhelmed if we just let this virus, apart from the number of people who have died, the health systems would have been overwhelmed. And that's why the Johnson government eventually agreed to some form of lockdown, having refused to consider the idea to begin with. And that means that the health systems are just inadequate. We know that now. They were way short of beds, intensive care units, protective equipment, testing facilities, and staff. a massive reduction in staff, putting tremendous pressure upon the existing staff to save lives and protect us from the spread of the virus. The whole hollowing out of the NHS system through the market, outsourcing, competition, breaking up the health system into trusts as opposed to make ends meet, a huge increase in the private contracts that have been going on. But this market economy for the NHS has totally failed to protect us in this situation. So it seems to me we should be looking for an economic recovery that puts the world on a path to more sustainable employment, livelihoods and growth, work in the whole planet, and also a growth and recovery which also harmonise with nature itself. Because where did this pandemic come from? As far as we can tell from the evidence now, it came from pathogens which have existed in wild animals for thousands of years, but because of the dramatic extension of industrial farming, of logging, of fossil fuel exploration across the world, increasingly these more remote areas where the wild animals have come closer and closer into contact with human beings. And through industrial farming, it seems the pathogens that are in bats and other wild animals have spread into farm animals like pigs and so on, and eventually into the markets of human beings. And then these pathogens, a series of them, which we've had over the past 25 years in particular, have spread across. This pandemic was only to be expected. And we'll have more pandemics. That's the frightening thought, unless something is done about organising the way in which we employ, grow and expand our needs, social needs, in harmony with the nature itself. One of the basic things, it seems to me, that comes out of the pandemic for the economy is that we must move away from fossil fuel production even more than we've done. Everybody knows that with the ending of airline flights, with the dramatic reduction in transport, with the reduction in the use of in energy, we have seen a dramatic fall in carbon emissions and also in global warming even over the past few months. Clean air in London, in Birmingham, elsewhere never seen before. People look in the sky and there's no noise. This is a short, brief moment we'll realise the way in which we really ought to be conducting our economy. And one of the basic things is to end carbon emission fuel industries. It's possible now, through technology, for us to move to renewables, to reduce the fossil fuel production, and move to the position where we can maintain the energy needs of our growing population without having to resort to the expansion of carbon emissions in global warming. Do we really need hundreds of airlines, millions of cars, billions of military weapons? Do we really need all these financial speculative entities which go around? I'm sure that you've noticed that while world economies have been diving, people have been made unemployed, 40 million in the US. We don't know yet exactly how many in the UK. While economies have been falling away, while trade's been collapsing, the financial markets of the world have been going up back to record heights after a brief fright. The huge amounts of money that have been pumped into the banks, by the central banks and into the financial institutions have led to an increased speculation in the stock market, not a reduced one. And this has nothing to do with the reality of what's happening in the world at the moment. So we really need to concentrate not on restoring the stock market and the equity prices in the stock market, but on providing the resources and the investment needed for social need. In my view, without public ownership of the main sectors of the economy, and that includes the banks, the big sectors of industry and technology, based on a national plan for state investment in public services, health, education, housing, and the new technological industries, in the UK in particular, we must get away from these unproductive areas that most UK economic activity orients to, either overseas, financial, or in property, or in business services, but not in the key sectors that matter to the employment of people and to a better life and better services for them. Those are the areas that we need to expand. And we have this opportunity, or should have this opportunity, if we had a government that mattered, to rebalance investment, to accelerate green investments that can offer job opportunities in energy and in the bioeconomy and in ecotourism and a green public infrastructure. So in my view, this is the direction we need to take after this pandemic comes to an end. Just like to point out that according to the latest figures in Europe, we're going to see a dramatic fall in GDP this year, somewhat of a recovery next year. But most evidence is suggesting to us that the UK economy is going to, if it stays as it is without resetting it, as I'm suggesting, we will see the slowest recovery we've had, even worse than the recovery after the Great Recession of 2009. And it will mean that we will not see unemployment drop back to levels we had before. We will not see an improvement in wages and incomes, even on the average, let alone all the people in the lower end of the scale who are already suffering in this situation. We're going to see a long, long depression and gradual recovery, if we're lucky, without another pandemic or without a new financial crisis over the next 5 or 10 years. That's the prospect before us, unless we do something about reorganizing the economy in a way which will really benefit the majority over the minority, which is the situation that we had before the pandemic. We don't want to return to normal, if that's what it means, in my view. We need to have a new economy and a new society. And that obviously should be part of any program of campaigning and demands by the trade union movement. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay, just a technical problem. Thanking Michael for his excellent contribution. Do we have any questions for Michael, please? You can either raise your hand or indicate on the chat line.
Not at the moment, Ian.
What? Okay. Mike Davey first, then Stuart.
No, I'm okay. Just answering you asked them. I'm okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Stuart Richardson, please. Would you like to raise a question, Stuart?
Yeah. Very impressive talk again, Michael. 2 points. You didn't mention at all about the projected government deficit, which the Institute of Budget Responsibility
yes, of course,
predicting 273 billion. The internal government Treasury document predicts 337 billion. At the very worst, 500 billion. I'd be very interested what you think of those figures. And obviously they're double the value of the government deficit in 2009 and 2010 tax year. And therefore the needs for the British ruling class to balance the books will be even more pressing. And what you think about how the government's, I mean, they're talking about pay freezes, ending the triple lock, tax increases. The other point is you said some very interesting things about the National Health Service, and I think the figure is that the National Health Service has got 17,000 beds less now than 2010. If you can say something about what has happened in the last 10 years in terms of financing the NHS, in terms of cuts and the new government announced plans.
Okay. Michael, do you want to answer that question now?
Yeah, sure. Perhaps I just add a couple of little extra graphs then to answer Stuart's point, if I can. Hold on while I switch over, see if I can pick them up. See, hopefully you can see that we have a situation where in the National Health Service, for example, the average pay for a social care worker in the care area is only 17,000 a year, which is compared to a city trader on 124,000. And we know who's more important. If I can just... Don't know what's happened there. Forget that. I shall come out. But I think the main point that Stuart's making is that that yes, not just in the UK, but internationally, during the period of the last 30 years, health systems have been drastically reduced in their ability to cope with any sort of emergency, or for that matter, even general medical support. Hospital beds have been cut across the board, particularly intensive care units. Nursing staff have been reduced. This is particularly the case in the UK. We've had dramatic reductions in nursing staff. One of the interesting things is that with all those hospital beds going, the idea was that NHS trusts were trying to be more efficient. They were trying to operate at 99% efficiency. So there was no spare beds. They weren't wasting any money. That was the idea. But of course, if you get a pandemic or any emergency, then they're completely overwhelmed. There was no spare capacity. The stocks of protection equipment, masks, etc., all those sorts of things were run down to the barest minimum. In the case of the UK, it was even worse because they didn't participate in any of the opportunities to build up stock that were offered in Europe or elsewhere, and so they were behind the curve when it came to going internationally to try and obtain this stuff. I'm operating in southern England at the moment, not far from an airport, and every day now we're getting 4 or 5 huge planes with NHS banners on them flying in and out. And when I check on the flight tracker on my iPad, I find out that these planes are coming in and out from China. And they're NHS planes either delivering masks and other equipment or going back to China to collect them. Huge planes, not little ones, big ones. That shows you that the UK has never been in a position to respond to this pandemic in an effective way. And we know nursing staff is well below the levels required to meet that. So it clearly needs a massive increase in the spending on not just on hospitals and investment, but on the staffing and on the equipment and so on, and the running of that National Health Service. And it makes a very good point that given the huge amount of deficit that is now going to be running up on the government's bill each year for this year and next year as a result of paying people and firms paying people to stay at home, and also firms to keep people on the books and to giving them loans so that they can come back. A massive amount of spending. We're seeing a budget deficit that's going to be hitting 15% of GDP rather than the 2 or 3 or less that we've been having over the last couple of years for this year and next. The public sector debt is going to jump from 85% of GDP to 100, possibly 120% of GDP. If you remember, before the global financial crash in 2008-9, the public sector debt in the UK was about 45% of GDP. After the global financial crash, it rose to 80-85. Then we had George Osborne's austerity program for God knows how long under the Cameron government and afterwards to try and drive down that debt level on the claim that we couldn't afford to pay it and service it. We had to drive it down. He never got it down. It never came down very much. It stayed around about 85% of GDP because growth was so poor. But in order to drive that down, they slashed all public sector services. We had a public sector pay freeze. Local government spending was cut by 40% in real terms over 10 years. Anybody in local government knows exactly what that's meant in reality. And now we're going to go back to a deficit which is 2 or 3 times larger than normal. And then we're going to have a debt level on the public books, which will be nothing we've seen since the Second World War. Now, the question is, do we have to, will the government opt for an austerity program similar to George Osborne's again, pushing us to the position of having to fight to keep people's wages up in the public sector, not just to improve the National Health Service, but even protect where we are now? Well, the government's talking in two ways. If you listen to what our Chancellor says, he's talking about allowing the debt to remain high for some time ahead and to introduce, we expect in the early part of July that Blondie will be presenting a special speech in which he says that there's going to be a big spending on infrastructure by the government on various aspects of services in order to help recover the economy. That's obviously going to have to come out of the public exchequer unless they can get private funds. So it seems that the government, at least for the moment, while there's no recovery in the economy, or until there is recovery, is going to allow this debt to remain up there, and for the deficits only to come down as growth returns. This is a program which, in Labour Movement, many of us have said anyway, that you don't need to reduce the debt if you can get growth. What you need is growth, then you can service any sort of debt that the public sector has. Interest rates are incredibly low, nearly zero. So to borrow money from the private sector doesn't cost very much. And you don't necessarily have to borrow it immediately while you're restoring the economy. The question, of course, is to get back growth. Now, if in a year or so, there is no real economic growth that can service this debt, and what I mean is something like, at the moment, before we had this pandemic, most world economies were declining fast. The growth rate was under 2%. The UK was virtually in a recession anyway before we had the pandemic. If it can only grow, if it has a big slump this year, a moderate recovery next year, and then grows at 1 or 2%, it's going to be left with a big burden of debt, not just the public sector, but the corporate sector will have a huge amount of debt too, and that will weigh on the ability of these companies and for the government to invest for recovery and in the future. So I would say that initially we probably will get a lot of talk about, you don't need to worry about austerity, we're not going to do it this time. But 1 or 2 years down the road, it's going to be a different story. And I think then we will face the issue of whether we're going to continue to try and improve public services, or whether the government will try to impose what it did before after the Great Recession, once again, in order to try and get these debt levels down because they cannot get growth. But we could get growth without doing that if we reset the economy in a way which aims at investment for social need and finances that through productive investments, not unproductive and wasteful investments, which often has happened in the past, that will deliver the growth to enable us to pay for the borrowings that we've had to make during this pandemic.
I've got 3 more questions now. If you make them brief, please. John Tiddle next, please. John? John, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, got with there. Okay. The first one is this question of the excess deaths, because the first time I was aware of it, well, it was the 19th of May that a lot of papers are talking about plus 10,000 more than the figures being announced daily. So now people have been speculating and said, yeah, it have mentioned about 60,000. So that's come back into the press. But I mean, you know, what other explanations than the virus could these other 10,000 or so be? And, you know, why are just we're still under 40,000 being reported daily? It doesn't make sense. That's the first point I'm making. The other is a question about, has there been any discussion about plans to support people recovering from crises that have faced over the last few years? And it includes COVID-19 and the problems that members of the Black and Asian minority communities are facing. And we've got that right now showing, it's been shown up what we've got. But one of the things I noticed that the Spanish government is proposing payment of a wage to help a wide range of personal needs. The idea is that if people have got funds themselves personally, it could probably solve quite a lot of pressures in terms of, and help with mental health and other problems. If people have got the ability to do things, it could take a lot of pressure off and probably save a lot of spending in other areas. So that's the thinking behind that. It's now getting interest, and actually it's been a policy of the Socialist Labour Party for a long time to pay a salary to people who need it. So we've got people like on furlough and so on who've lost income and so on, and they're getting a sensible salary to enable them to help themselves get out of this situation, particularly now we've had this. And I say we've got this, and we've plus for a lot of people facing things like racism, this can all be brought together. And noting that the unions are now growing, and noting that the business, the groups that are raising Black People Matter, it seems to me that there's a swell here that putting this forward, this sort of idea, it's just about the time to do that. So I'm just asking if, and the last speaker mentioned a number of things that made a lot of sense in this, but I think that the Trades Council and unions should be thinking about a plan in the aftermath. We haven't planned very well for the thing. Are we planning for the aftermath?
Michael?
Well, I think John is right. I think that's part of this discussion. We're trying to plan for the aftermath, and that's us. I don't think the government has still got any idea what the hell it's doing. And on the question of deaths, as John said, we've got, as I showed, the figures for excess deaths are really quite staggering. And you have to ask yourself, when we look across the board of different countries, every country has got a level of excess deaths above the normal mortality rate. And those excess death figures are often higher than the official figures for COVID deaths as a whole. And the reason for the difference, apparently, is that most of the accounting is being done by hospitals. So it's in hospitals and other health organizations where the accounting for deaths is being done. What's usually being lost are mostly the people in the residential homes, where there's been a huge number of deaths, as we know, as a result of total lack of care for the residential homes and protection of those homes in all countries, not just the UK, and also people dying at home. And so they only come up when the medical certificates and the funerals take place to add to the figures. And now the excess death figure for the UK is 60,000. That's 65% higher than the normal rate. There is no other country in Europe that can match that level of excess deaths. And that's very frightening, as we're supposedly all supposed to be going back to work over the next few weeks or months. So that's the frightening part of that. And therefore, part of what John says is absolutely right. We have, what protection is there going to be for the people who are most vulnerable in this situation, which is in particular, not just old people like myself, I'm a vulnerable member, but also people who have got pre-existing medical problems, who are not well, unhealthy for various reasons. And lots of poor people are unhealthy because they haven't had healthy food, they haven't had good housing conditions and so on. So they've already got problems, and then they're placed with the danger of this virus. And as we now know, as John points out, Black and ethnic minorities appear to be more susceptible to this virus. Maybe it's partly because of health reasons and others than other people. So none of these people, as far as I can see, are going to be protected if we all go back to work. There's nothing being put in place to protect these people. There's nothing being done about residential homes. Even now, there's still nothing being done. The resources are not being there to shield these people from the dangers of the virus if there's a second wave. Even if the existing wave doesn't pick up, there's every possibility that a second wave could come as we go into the autumn, which would hit us again and force us to consider restrictions. So yes, the aftermath is what we're talking about today. What sort of economy we want, how we're going to protect jobs on the one hand, how we're going to avoid any measures by the government to introduce austerity, how we're going to expand the services that we need, like the health system. But we still have a problem with the existing virus and its pandemic and the protection and saving of lives, which is not being done adequately in countries like the UK and the United States in particular at the moment. The other two countries with frightening developments are Brazil and India. And in these countries where there's a complete lack of an attempt to protect lives, apart from the very basic, we still have a problem. It's not going to go away, but it's a signal, it seems to me, Chair, of the sort of response we're going to get to try and solve the problem of jobs and conditions and wages for people when we go back to work. The facilities for that are also well short of what is needed.
Thank you. Now, time is now running short, and we have 3 more questions. Okay, can you just put your questions to Michael, and then we'll get Michael to do a rounded answer to those 3 questions.
Yeah, I've got a few questions in the chat. I'll see if I can answer them well in.
Okay, because time is short, we're going to move on to other business as well. Okay, Kathy, would you like to raise your question? Catherine Gaffney, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, in terms of planning for the future, I did attend a Unite the Union national meeting on looking at just that very question. And I've put something up about saying, I thought that we could have an overarching campaign called something simple like Pay Key Workers, under which other campaigns could take place, like resisting the thing about freezing nurses' wages and various other things. And a couple of people thought that was a good idea. So I just would like to see if other people thought that was a good idea that could come from the Trades Council or something. I mean, Dominic Cummings isn't the only one who can come up with simple memes that can go further, and you know, you could have a logo and all the rest of it. But I think Pay Key Workers could be a campaign that has legs and could join in with similar campaigns that people are saying, you know, Sheffield needs a wage rise and all the rest of it. It would, but using the word key workers reminds us of the great feeling that people have had and that we can need to build on in the future. And I just want to know, will we be able to access these PowerPoint presentation slides again?
Okay. Thanking Kathy for the question. Next question is Mary.
Thank you, Michael, for giving us a sense of what the impact might be from the pandemic on jobs. And I think we've got a triple whammy here. We know already employers are attacking paying conditions under the guise of the pandemic. But the wider context clearly is Brexit. It looks like within 6 months we might be leaving the EU without an agreement. We also know that the trade bill that's going through Parliament at the moment is a threat again of increased privatisation and bigger attacks on workers' rights and jobs. So could you give a sense of, if you factor in Brexit and new trade arrangements, what kind of size of attack are we looking at? Thank you.
Okay, and finally, can we have Naeem? Naeem, your question? To the final question.
Okay. Well, I think we've been talking about the impact of the Corona crisis and how the government is going to respond to it. I think there's no doubt they're all going to go for growth, but I think the question is, what kind of growth are we going to go for? And we have seen that in the past, when they've gone for the growth, they've actually given money to the bankers, and it hasn't really benefited. And the people we represent have actually suffered as a result of the austerity that has followed it. And I think the same thing is happening here now. It seems to be that the travel industry, the tourist industry, the hospitality industry, they are all asking money from the government to actually allow them to continue growing in the same way as before. And that is not going to lead us into a place where the workers are going to be safe or where the workers' jobs are going to be safe. So where is the demand for, restarting the economy or resetting the economy, which is environmentally sustainable and actually people friendly, and it's going to not cause us the pain that we had as a result of the banking crisis in 2009 and 2010, and also keep us safe under the present circumstances.
Okay. Thank you, Niall, for the question. Michael, would you like to respond to those final three?
Yes, well, I mean, the most important thing is people going back to work. Nobody should lose their job out of this pandemic. Nobody should be worse off if they go back to their work, their position and so on, out of this pandemic. Through no fault of their own, have they been furloughed, sent home, laid off. But of course, that's not what's going to happen. The employers are going to attempt to reduce their workforces in order to make themselves more efficient or profitable. They're using the opportunity to clear out, as far as they're concerned, people they don't think they need, and they've got the excuse to do so. That will be the argument. On the one hand, they're going to do that to us as workers, reduce the workforce, reduce their hours, reduce their conditions. On the other hand, they're taking millions and millions, particularly the large companies, from the government and from the banks in loans and possibly even in straight grants over this past period and going into the future. So they're going to be helped by the government to revive, while at the same time they're going to try and reduce their costs for labour as a result of the pandemic. So that's a key battle for the trade union movement, is to preserve people's jobs and conditions as best we can. And also, as I've said before, that we need to expand the public services, which have been so important in getting us through this pandemic insofar as we've been able to do so, despite the failures of the government and the failures of the market economy. We need to drive and demand an increase in the spending in these public services areas. I find it very difficult to imagine any government, even the Johnson government, opposing increased spending on the NHS and so on to increase resources and so on. And I'm sure we're going to get the government saying that that they will do that over the next few months, amongst other investment plans that they've got. But as I said before, if we don't get any sufficient growth, particularly in the capitalist sector of the economy, which is the biggest sector, the public sector is relatively small compared to our big monopoly companies and the banks and so on. If they don't get enough profit, then they're going to be demanding cuts in the public sector, and they're going to be demanding more people be put out of work. So there's going to be a struggle that's going to take place over the next 2 or 3 years. In my view, that struggle is unavoidable, because I don't think the capitalist economy in Britain and other countries can recover to normal as it was before, insofar as that was particularly good. They're not going to get back to that easily. So we're going to see, with profitability so low and with large sectors of the economy severely damaged as a result of the pandemic, we're going to see a big battle in the industrial front, in the workplace front, to preserve what we had before and try to improve it, and a big battle to try and expand the public sector and the public services that we require. The labour movement should really stand for taking back into control in the state sector the major sectors of the economy and new sectors that we need in order to achieve that. Of course, that's not going to be possible under this government, so it's going to be a political struggle, on the one hand, to have a different sort of economy, as Nazim and others have said, an economy which aims at social need in harmony with nature to improve the environment and the climate. And that's the sort of economy that we want to build as a labour movement, against the efforts of the government and the existing forces under capitalism to continue just as before, while at the same time further reducing their conditions as an excuse out of the pandemic. So that is the prospect before us, and that's why it makes, I think, for the first time for ages, an opportunity for the trade union and labour movement to take a lead when there's a mood amongst the public that they aren't prepared to see further cuts. They want to see an expansion of public services, not the opposite. They want to see a reduction of useless, unproductive activity that we've seen before this pandemic. Because, I'll finish on this, Chair, we have to remember that this is just one pandemic. It's not over yet. But there's every possibility over the next 3 or 4 years we should get another. And that could be in a situation when the capitalist economy is even weaker than it is now.
Okay. If you can now all unmute yourselves, please. And then give a big round of applause to Michael for his excellent contribution. We will now take any other business. Okay. Stuart? Stuart, unmute yourself.
Yeah, given the incredible crisis around this Black Lives Matter, it was agreed with the President that we would invite a speaker on Black Lives Matter, and Caldisha Brown Burrell, who's the sister of one of the Burrell family who was murdered by the police, did agree at a Black Lives Matter to speak tonight, but she's not replied to the text. But if I can just very briefly say, one of the most extraordinary political events I've ever been to was today in Centenary Square, in which 5,000 to 10,000 young people, 95% of the thing was under 20, 25, 30 at the maximum, a very mixed young people from the white community and different ethnic minority communities. And the vibration of the chanting was very, very powerful. I did say that I was the treasurer of the Birmingham TUC, and I wanted to make a brief statement of solidarity with their struggle. But unfortunately, despite offering a powerful set of sound system that was used to be owned by the Birmingham TUC, they had a tiny one. So when I spoke, giving solidarity, talking about racism and the fight of the trade union movement, so many people couldn't hear that they started chanting. So, but anyway, it was good that we were there. We were good vigilantly thing. There have been 3 other events, much more modest events. There was an event in Handsworth on Monday, which was cancelled by the organisers. But despite that, 200 or 300 people turned up, waved banners, marched around the street with great anger. Yesterday, again, it seemed to be an event we did supply the sound equipment for. Was cancelled, but again, 120 people turned up. And later in that day, the SWP and Standard for Racism had a small event, about 50 people, with Salmi Yakub speaking. So there is an extraordinary upsurge and radicalization of young people. And where this is going, I don't know. But I think it's very important the trade union movement expressed its solidarity to the hostility towards the racism. And we also say that racism is not just against the black community. There is deep racism, Islamophobic racism against the Muslim community. As I mentioned in a speech yesterday, Salma Yakut had her scarf physically torn off her after 9/11. And so I think that, an important movement has appeared, and it's very important the trades movement try to relate to this. Okay, sorry to be long.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Right, next is Mary Wilkes, please.
Yeah.
Mary.
Michael talked about the need for change, not least in the health service. And if I could briefly report from a meeting of Birmingham Keeper NHS Public yesterday, which is very much focused on using the huge support from the public for the NHS and care workers at the moment to try and launch a campaign for the renationalisation of NHS and social care, specifically to end outsourcing. We know the worst excesses of the recent COVID contracts, the PPE distribution, testing, and social care have all privatised. So the campaign is focusing on ending outsourcing and integrating social care and support into the NHS rather than the huge privatised reality we have at the moment. So the Birmingham campaign has drafted a leaflet and a model motion which has been sent to the secretary, and hopefully those could be distributed to delegates, and people will be able to discuss them in branches if you're meeting and pass these resolutions. But specifically, there's a plan to celebrate the NHS on its anniversary on July the 4th, an ongoing campaign for taking back control of the NHS and social care and re-nationalising it. At the moment, it's 20% is already privatised. There's a meeting on Saturday of Health Campaigns Together, which will identify what the campaign will be about. But I hope once there's a clear shape to the campaign, the Trades Council can promote the actions and publicise them, because now is a time when people realise just what social care support and the NHS mean, and we need to seize this moment, as I think is a point that Michael was saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Right. Any further ARB? Okay. Catherine? No. You've got to go, Stuart. Catherine next.
Yeah. I've had a notification from the National Hazards Campaign about a strike that's having what they call a virtual picket line. I don't quite know how you managed to do that, but anyway, it's a Zoom meeting, and this is a group of contractors for the NHS who've been transporting, couriering COVID-19 samples, and it's about well, there's redundancies called, I think, following on from complaints about health and safety standards, and there's been a victimisation, and whistleblowers getting victimised, and disability discrimination, all sorts. But the details of that is that it's the IWGB, which is a bit of a strange union, but has been organising precarious workers in precarious employment quite a bit. On 10th of June, from 10 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock. So the details you'll see on the IWGB website, but I've also circulated it to the EC of the Trades Council a few minutes before this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. 9?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last few weeks, I've received some suggestions from various members and delegates and whatnot in terms of what we should be doing as Trades Council. And I think today's meeting was one of the first meetings in which we've properly considered what the impact of the corona crisis is going to be. And I think following on from today, I think what as Birmingham BTUC we should be looking at doing is to organize meetings on how we're going to fight for low-paid workers to increase their wages. And I think Birmingham Trade Council would look to organizing a meeting with, say, the Trades Council in Sheffield to discuss that. And if anybody wants to join us on that, then please forward your suggestions. Also, I think in terms of keeping our National Health Service public, that campaign should actually be given priority as well. And we should be organizing a meeting on that. And I think also looking at what is happening in the national press in terms of the hospitality industry, the travel industry and everything else, campaigning for getting more money so that they can actually continue to grow in their own way. We should be looking at various environmental campaigns to see what our demands should be. So I think that's another meeting we as Birmingham BTUC should be looking at organizing in the next few weeks. So again, if anybody wants to give us suggestions of who we can ask to come and speak, what our demands should be, and how we proceed with those, please forward it to us, and we'll consider doing that in the next few weeks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Niall, for those constructive comments. And yes, we do look forward to the prospect of holding further meetings.
And finally, I think we should also have a meeting on the events that are taking place in the US, and that should be an urgent meeting taking place over the next week or so on Black Lives Matter, because it has got an impact in this country as well as in the rest of the world.
Okay. Well, thanking Noam for those excellent comments as well. We do look forward to the possibility of further meetings on job protections and what have you, environment, and a good range of issues. So we do welcome your suggestions. Now the time is 8:27, and Stuart, you've had one go already. So
yeah, very briefly, Ian, just following up from Mary's points, I absolutely agree with what's the proposal she's put forward, but it's just useful to say, because there is a new audience for radical ideas, I think, that we did give out from the stall we were running at the Black Lives event today, the Health Campaigns United newspaper, making themes about the massive cuts in the NHS under the Tories, but also the failure of the NHS around protecting black people around this crisis. And that went down really well. And lots of people took the newspapers, quite a lot of people came in and had a chat with us. So I think we need to reach out to these new layers of people who are coming into action, becoming critical of society, and getting out to these Black Lives public events with these campaigns, I think is quite crucial in the next period.
Okay, thank you, Stuart. Now, time is now 8:29, and I'm afraid I can't wish you all a safe journey home, because you're all now safely at home, looking warm and safe. So therefore, I wish all of you a good night, and look forward to meeting you.
If people want to stay behind and have a informal chat, help yourself. I'll keep the meeting open for a little while until people are here.
Okay.
Okay, Richard, want to say something? Unmute yourself, Richard.
Oops, where are we?
Richard, you should be able to speak, Richard.
There is none of the war, I think, today.
Richard, you need to unmute yourself.
Bottom left.
Richard.
Down there. Okay.
Oh, you're done.
Oh, good. Okay. I mean, Michael Roberts has really presented so forcefully the issues that face working people in Birmingham and their families. I mean, the most difficult times that they face, certainly since 2009. It was really good to have all the data and the arguments and so on. I think, I mean, on some of the issues, we do have campaigns going, like on the NHS and social care. On others, there aren't campaigns, and it's good to hear, for example, the talk of getting going on the issue of the low paid. And I think on this range of issues present a huge challenge to Birmingham Trades Council, not just to hold a series of meetings on various issues, but to have a strategy and a plan for really taking them into the trade union movement in the city. So in that context, I'm a bit puzzled why the Trades Council thinks that the most important issue we should talk about at our next meeting is the case of Julian Assange. I mean, it's not unimportant, but it's of no significance at all to working people in Birmingham faced with the real life challenges they face. So I do think, you know, it's quite urgent that the Trades Council actually sorts out its priorities, its strategies, and a plan of action.
Ian, can I answer that?
Yeah.
I think as most people would realize, you know, we don't just only deal with emergency issues as they appear. We deal with issues that the Trades Council has decided through its delegates needs to be addressed. The Assange meeting was decided by the Birmingham Trades Council delegate meeting over 3 months ago, that we should invite somebody from that campaign. And that was scheduled over 3 months ago for the next meeting. And that's why it's going ahead. We don't think it's irrelevant anymore. We think it's just as relevant as it has ever been, because it's freedom of speech and it's human rights and everything else that we are always interested in. So we're not going to just say, you forget about everything else because we've got this emergency. We are going to deal with issues which are long-standing, and we will continue to do that in every case. So we're not only going to prioritize what I think is the most important thing today, we're going to prioritize things that we as a movement think are of importance in the long run, as well as have been in the past. So we're not going to cancel a meeting that was scheduled over 3 months ago, decided by its delegates democratically.
Okay.
Well, in that case, there is a problem with your priorities. And I would find it very difficult.
Our priorities haven't changed. They are the same. We are democratic. We are against, we are for human rights. We are for freedom of speech. And that's what we're doing in this instance. We are not changing our priorities.
Of course, we're all in favour of those things. But it is a question of registering significance of the issues that Michael Roberts has talked about, the daily lives of the people we are supposed to represent in this city. And
Richard, this is a polemic.
That means we have to make some choices about priorities.
Well, okay.
3 months ago, none of us would have predicted the situation we're in.
Richard is comment on this, Ian.
If Richard is a delegate, then he's free to put a resolution to the delegates conference, the delegates meeting, to ask them to cancel it. But I don't think that's what the delegates would do. The delegates have agreed to do it. I have no authority, or Ian has no authority to cancel it.
Can I just say that, yeah, I mean, this was agreed at the March meeting as every opportunity for Richard or anybody else. This was that took place in the Council House to object to the resolution. I think the notion that we only deal with national issues, we don't deal with international issues, is very, very dangerous.
I didn't say that. I'm trying to put words in my mouth.
Point of order.
I never said that.
Point of order.
And I'm absolutely in favour of dealing with...
Chair, point of order.
Hold on.
I think
we've heard quite enough from Stuart. We've heard quite enough from Stuart this evening.
Can you mute everyone, please?
I've unmuted them.
Mute. Okay. Right. We can't have this. We have an informal discussion. We can't have this type of argument going out of hand.
Yeah.
Richard's made a point. Nine's made a point. Stuart's made a point. Okay. We haven't got the authority to cancel meetings under normal circumstances. Like with Assange, it was agreed 3 months ago, and we'll go ahead with it, unless we are forced by external circumstances to rearrange that meeting or hold it at another date. But it will go ahead nevertheless. We do need to look at other questions like we had got raised tonight about redundancies, protection of jobs, environmental jobs and what have you, yes. But the point is we need more input from delegates and more assistance in arranging for these types of meetings to take place. It can't just fall on me and Naim and Graham and one or two others to arrange these meetings. Other people have got to get involved. And I'm getting angry about this myself. Look, there's my list tonight. Who's going to do these meetings for us? Right? That's where we are. That's what we need to start looking at. So it's all very well saying, I don't want this and I don't want that. I'm not having it no more. I want you to start arranging and assisting with the construction of meetings. If you can't do it, bugger off. I've had enough. I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. Right then. And I make no apologies for my inordinate use of language either. Right. If we're going to grow, we want people on board who will be able to assist in a wide range of subjects for meetings, conferences and what have you, and campaign and initiative work to help us grow. We don't want these petty arguments tripping over and wrecking it for everyone else, because it won't get anywhere at all. Right.
I think here, as it stands at the moment, we are still going to the points that have come out of today's meetings. As the executive, we are going to try and organize events around those issues so that we can address it and discuss it properly and take it further. The other thing is the Birmingham TUC is not going to do any of this on its own. It is a delegated body. Its affiliates are trade unions, and we have to work with those trade unions, and they have to take on the main part of that work. We have to provide them the venues through which they can do it and bring them together so that we can do it more effectively.
Okay.
Anybody else wants to say anything?
Just before we finish, Chair, could we be reminded of the date of the next meeting?
Its official date for the next meeting would be the first Thursday of July, but because of the issues we have been discussing, and such, we may have some meetings before that, but they would not be the delegate meetings. So we may have a meeting on Black Lives Matter, we may have a meeting on what's happening with low pay, and we may have meetings on environmental issues and anything that the current corona crisis throws at us. So we are in an emergency situation. We cannot meet in the council house. We are meeting virtually, and therefore we will plan as and when things are necessary and when we can do it. The problem at the moment is also that there are too many meetings taking place, and to find a space in which we can actually have meeting is quite difficult as well. So, but there will be a meeting the first Thursday of the month in July, but there may be meetings before that because of the conditions we are going through at the moment.
Naeem, do you have a sense of how many union branches are meeting at the moment? Are they active or have they gone moribund?
From my understanding, my personal experience is that I don't think any branches are meeting, and I don't think any Labour Party branches in Birmingham are meeting. I think
UCU is meeting and NEU.
Okay, so that's news to me. I think David Hamlin, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that my branch is meeting virtually next week.
For the first time?
I believe it's the second
okay.
That we've done a virtual one.
That's good.
Because I'm doing a report back on Trades Council.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I hope it's going to be a good report.
Absolutely.
Can I just say on that the NEU have never had bigger meetings. We have a meeting open to all members, general meetings, 6 times a year, every 2 months. And the usual attendance is between 20 and 30. We've had Zoom meetings of 225 and other meetings of 80 and 60, etc. So the NEU has been a sort of pretty vibrant, and as Shirley indicated, people are becoming reps, etc. I'm also a member of Unite Communities, which had a number of smaller discussion meetings and one branch meeting recently. So I think that there is a certain activity environment. I do understand, although I'm not a member of the Labour Party, that there's virtually nothing happening in terms of meetings in the Labour Party. But I mean, that's obviously their business. So I think there is a certain level of activity, but how extensive it is, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else for discussion? Okay.
Okay, well, thanks very much, everybody.
Okay.
And hopefully see you at the next meeting. And we'll keep you, I think, two things to look at. One is our Facebook page, and the other is our website that will advertise the meeting as and when we are able to arrange one. Okay, so look at it as regularly as you can, so you get informed very quickly and circulate widely. Okay.
A little bit of a fire. I'll check the time for the best. Yeah, that's right. What's this? I think it's fully charged anyway.